Imagine an elite athlete standing in the tunnel of Arrowhead Stadium. He has spent 20 years preparing for this 90-minute window. He has endured the surgeries, the isolation, and the crushing weight of a nation's expectations. But as he steps onto the grass in Kansas City, his manager pulls him aside with a terrifying instruction. To save the team, he must not win. The reward for victory is a professional death sentence. The price of ambition is total elimination. This was the structural trap set for Algeria and Austria during the 2026 World Cup. It wasn't just a game. It was a mathematical riddle that threatened to break the integrity of the sport on its biggest stage. The atmosphere in Missouri was thick with more than just summer humidity. It was heavy with the ghost of a 44-year-old scandal and the scent of a governing body that had prioritized expansion over fairness. As the players took their positions, the world wasn't just watching a football match. They were watching the logical conclusion of a broken system. To understand how we got to this moment, you have to look at the architecture of the 2026 tournament. This was Gianni Infantino's crown jewel. The FIFA president had expanded the field from 32 teams to 48. He sold this to the public as the democratization of football. He spoke of inclusion and global growth. But behind the curtain, the reality was far more cynical. More teams meant more member associations. More associations meant more guaranteed votes for his presidency. It was a political masterstroke disguised as a sporting celebration. The immediate side effect of this expansion was the introduction of the 12-group format. In this system, 8 of the best third-place teams would advance to the knockout rounds. On paper, it sounds generous. In practice, it created a scenario where losing could be more advantageous than winning. This is the contrast engine of modern FIFA. They sell you a festival of football, but they hand the players a spreadsheet. The political backdrop made the tension even more suffocating. The 2026 World Cup was a collision of sporting theater and raw geopolitical power. Before the first whistle even blew, Infantino had already signaled where his loyalties lay. He appeared at a peace summit alongside President Donald Trump. He wore a red cap that mimicked the political branding of the host nation's leader. Most shockingly, FIFA unveiled a brand new FIFA Peace Prize and awarded it to Trump on the spot. Critics noted that the prize had never existed before and seemed to have been invented solely for that photo opportunity. FIFA's own statutes demand strict political neutrality. Yet, here was the head of world football openly campaigning with a sitting head of state. This was happening while the United States was engaged in active military hostilities with Iran. It was the first time a World Cup host was at war with a participant. The Iranian delegation was treated like a security threat rather than a sports team. Their visas were delayed or denied. They were forced to set up camp in Mexico and fly into U.S. cities only on match days. They were guests who were barely allowed to cross the threshold. Then, there was the money. FIFA projected $13 billion in revenue from this tournament alone. Yet, they maintained their non-profit status, exempting them from the taxes that would have funded the very infrastructure the fans were using. Ticket prices reached astronomical levels. A seat for the final was listed at $11,000. Fans were being squeezed by a dynamic pricing system that felt more like a stock market than a ticket office. The attorneys general of New York and New Jersey even launched formal investigations into price manipulation. The people's game had become an elite extraction project. This brings us to Group J. On the Friday before the Kansas City match, Spain had finished their group games. They were the reigning European champions and arguably the most terrifying team in the world. They were a machine of relentless possession and tactical perfection. The bracket was now set. If you finished second in Group J, you were rewarded with a trip to Los Angeles to face Spain. It was essentially an appointment with your own executioner. However, if you finished third, the path was different. You would likely face Switzerland. The difference between Spain and Switzerland is the difference between a mountain and a hill. For Ralf Rangnick's Austria and the Algerian national team, the math was unavoidable. A win or a draw for Austria kept them in second place. A loss dropped them to third. For the first time in their careers, these players were staring at a scoreboard that told them excellence was a mistake. The situation was a mirror image of the most shameful day in football history. June 25, 1982. In the Spanish city of Gijón, West Germany played Austria in the final group game. The math then was just as cruel. If West Germany won by 1 or 2 goals, both they and Austria would advance. This would eliminate Algeria, who had already played their final game and were watching from the stands. West Germany scored in the 10th minute. For the remaining 80 minutes, the players simply stopped. They walked. They passed the ball backwards. They shared a silent, mutual understanding that the game was over. The Spanish crowd began screaming, "Out, out!" They began burning their own money in the stands. Even the German commentator was so disgusted, he told his viewers to turn off their televisions. It became known as the disgrace of Gijón. FIFA tried to fix this by mandating that final group games must be played simultaneously, but in 2026, the 48-team format reopened the wound. The ghost of Gijón was seen walking the halls of Arrowhead Stadium. The media was already calling it the disgrace of Kansas City before the coin toss. Pundits on every continent were debating whether the players would have the integrity to ignore the bracket. The game began with a strange, jittery energy. The players knew the world was looking for a fix. They knew every misplaced pass would be analyzed for hidden intent. Austria struck first in the 28th minute. Marko Arnautovic, the veteran striker, found the net with a clinical finish. For a moment, it seemed the competitive spirit had won, but the goal created a bizarre atmosphere. The Austrian fans didn't celebrate with their usual fervor. They knew this goal had just moved them closer to a confrontation with Spain. Algeria responded before halftime. Rafik Ghali equalized, and the score sat at 1-1. This was the perfect result for both teams. It allowed both to advance while keeping Algeria in the third-place slot. The second half began with a noticeable drop in intensity. The ball stayed in the middle of the pitch. The sprints became jogs. The tackles became polite suggestions. Around the 75th minute, Algeria completed over 100 consecutive passes without an Austrian player attempting a challenge. The crowd in Kansas City, who had paid thousands of dollars to be there, began to turn. A low whistle started in the upper tiers and soon became a deafening roar of disapproval. They hadn't paid for a tactical stalemate. They had paid for a fight. Somewhere in a hotel room in Mexico, the Iranian national team was watching this on a delay. They needed a winner. Any winner. A draw in Kansas City meant Iran was officially out of the World Cup. Their entire tournament, their years of training under the shadow of war, came down to whether 2 other teams decided to be honest. This wasn't a series of isolated mistakes. It was exactly how the system was designed to work. FIFA had built a tournament where the integrity of the game was a secondary concern to the volume of the matches. By creating so many paths to the knockout rounds, they had diluted the stakes until they became toxic. They had incentivized passivity. They had commodified the results until the players became accountants in shorts. But then the human element intervened. Professional athletes are not robots. They have pride that a spreadsheet cannot account for. In the 90th minute, with the game seemingly dead, Riyad Mahrez decided he didn't care about Switzerland. He didn't care about Spain. He cared about the ball. He cut inside from the right wing and curled a magnificent shot into the top corner. 2-1 to Algeria. The stadium erupted. The Iranian bench in Mexico went wild. The math had been shattered by a moment of individual brilliance. Algeria was now in second place, and Austria was in third. The roles had flipped. The fix was off. But the drama wasn't over. In the 6th minute of stoppage time, Austria launched a desperate long ball. Sasa Kalidzic, a giant of a man, rose above the Algerian defense and headed the ball into the net. 3-3. The final whistle blew seconds later. The draw was back. Both teams celebrated, but the celebration felt hollow. They had played a thriller, but the result was exactly what the cynics had predicted. The bracket had been preserved. Austria would go to Los Angeles to be dismantled by Spain. Algeria would head to Vancouver to face Switzerland. And Iran? Iran was gone. The Iranian players were filmed in their hotel room as the final whistle blew. There were no words. Some sat on the floor with their heads in their hands. Others stared blankly at the television screen. They had been eliminated by a game they weren't allowed to play in, decided by a header in a city they weren't allowed to enter. Their World Cup was over because of the cold, hard mathematics of a 48-team format that valued best third-place rankings over head-to-head competition. This is the reality of the modern World Cup. We are told it is a celebration of global unity. We are told it is the pinnacle of human achievement. But the 2026 tournament revealed the cracks in the golden facade. When you prioritize revenue over structure, you get games where winning is a liability. When you prioritize political alliances over neutrality, you get peace prizes for world leaders, while athletes are treated like criminals. The $13 billion will be collected. Gianni Infantino will likely be re-elected by a landslide of grateful member associations. The stadiums will be cleaned, and the fans will go home. But the memory of that night in Kansas City remains. It serves as a warning. Football is a game of passion, but it is governed by an organization that views it as a logistical exercise in wealth accumulation. The players in Kansas City tried to be honest. They scored goals. They fought until the 96th minute. They gave the fans a spectacle that, for a few moments, transcended the bracket. But even their best efforts couldn't hide the fact that the system was working against them. They were playing inside a machine that was built to produce a specific outcome, and no amount of individual brilliance could truly break the gears. As we look toward the future of the World Cup, we have to ask what we are willing to accept. Are we okay with a tournament where the host's political climate dictates who is allowed to compete? Are we okay with ticket prices that exclude the very people who built the sports culture? Are we okay with a format so complex that it creates disgraces every 4 years? The Iranian team eventually boarded their flight out of Mexico. They flew home to a country still in turmoil, carrying the weight of an exit they didn't deserve. They were the collateral damage of an expanded field. They were the victims of a Peace Prize World Cup that had no room for them. Back in the United States, the lights were already being dimmed at Arrowhead Stadium. The grass was torn, the stands were empty, and TMT AET. In the end, the 2026 World Cup will be remembered for its scale. It was the biggest, the loudest, and the most expensive. But for those who care about the soul of the game, it will be remembered for something else. It will be remembered as the moment the spreadsheet finally overtook the stadium. It will be remembered as the tournament where the governing body stopped even pretending that the football was the most important part. The final image of that night wasn't a goal or a save. It was the sight of the Iranian captain sitting alone on a luggage cart at the airport. He wasn't looking at a bracket. He wasn't thinking about Spain or Switzerland. He was just a man who had been told that his dream was a casualty of someone else's political expansion. He was the human cost of a $13 billion profit margin. The ball is still round, but the field is no longer level. That is the cost.